Hey, what's up guys? So this week Escort is releasing a series of really big updates for a bunch of the different radar detectors. It's going to provide some performance improvements, some false alert filtering improvements, some photo radar detection improvements, and some bug fixes. Now, as far as the detectors that are getting updated here, we've got the Redline 360C, both the North American and international versions. We've got the Max 360C Mark II, the Max 360 Mark II, the Max 3, and different variants of the Redline Ci. And then as far as the improvements and updates to the different detectors, well, that's what I want to go ahead and talk about here in this video. Most of the detectors are going to have all the same improvements, with maybe some key exceptions like the Redline Ci, which has actually already had a lot of these changes. They just added kind of the remaining ones, and the Max 3, which has an older platform, so some of its changes are going to be a little bit different. And so for those of you guys wondering about the changes for your specific detector, down in the video description underneath the like button, you'll find links to not only where you can purchase the detectors, but also links to the full release notes and discussion areas for each of the individual detectors. And so with that said, let's go ahead and start running through all the big changes and improvements here with these latest updates. Alright, so starting right off, let's begin by discussing the improvements to performance. We've got the improvements to not only the long distance range, but also the responsiveness and how fast it is at alerting to different guns. We've had some issues in the past with alerting to certain K-band guns, particularly the Decatur Genesis 2, but also some other guns as well. And it looks like finally with this latest update, Escort has fully addressed this issue. Thank goodness. I went back out earlier this week with the updated Redline 360C, and now I find that this detector can alert in less than 1 second after the Genesis 2 Select begins transmitting. And this is a huge improvement compared to earlier firmware versions where it could take 3 seconds or 13 seconds, or even just not alert at all. Typically now it would alert at sub 1 second alert times. Occasionally I would see around 3-second delays, but for the most part, it was very quick here. I also got similar results here testing with the Falcon HR, as well as the Bushnell radar gun. Similar stuff again, where typically it was sub 1 second, sometimes closer to 3 seconds. I also went out to go do some testing with the Max 360C Mark II. Unfortunately, I had a bunch of issues in that test. I had people pulling in front of the radar detector car for a little bit, and then luckily eventually moving. I had some big city trucks that unfortunately pulled up and just literally parked right in front of me with all of my radar guns. Fortunately, I was able to talk to them and they were okay with coming back the next day, and so they left and I was able to continue testing, so a big thank you to them. However, after all of that and I finished doing all my testing, it turns out that the GoPro on the Max 360C Mark II had overheated and shut off before I was even able to get my testing done. And so unfortunately, I don't have any results from that specific detector. However, luckily a lot of other people have been doing some testing as well, and so we've got a lot of data and information about this now. For example, you've got Westwind77. He tested with the same guns I did and got similar results. Generally, the Redline was super quick in responding, but occasionally he saw around 3-second delays. Nor'easter 18's also done some testing. With the Falcon HR, it was a little bit slower, around 1.5 seconds to 3 seconds or so. He's also done some testing on Ka-band with the Stalker unit, and he found that it was reasonably responsive, but still slower than some of the other high-end detectors. And understandably, he's wanting faster response speeds here. Then you've got Road Dog, who tested with 4 different K and Ka-band guns, and overall he found the Redline 360C was very fast and responsive. Again, some variances from gun to gun, but overall it did a good job here. And finally, there's also DC Fluid, who also tested on both K and Ka. And he found the Redline 360C's average response time was around 1 to 2.3 seconds or so. And after all his testing, he's saying that these results are improved, they're more consistent, and that most users would find these results acceptable, but he still doesn't think that it's good enough either. And that's totally understandable because the detector is still not as ultra fast on Ka-band in particular as other detectors like the Uniden R8 or the Valentine 1 Gen 2, for example. Those detectors are much more responsive. And so with all this testing data, we're starting to get a better idea here of the big picture. There is some variability that we're seeing. We've also been seeing some things like how some of these newer Escort detectors can be particularly finicky with like radar antenna distance or even orientation and whatnot. But overall, it seems like we've got some really big improvements here compared to previous versions of the detectors. And while I definitely agree that there's certainly additional room for improvement here with these performance figures, at this point it's no longer the deal breaker that it used to be with previous firmware versions. And so for that reason, I would actually be comfortable adding detectors like the Redline 360C back onto my list of recommended detectors. And after I finish this video, get it shared with you guys, I'll head over to my website and get that updated. And then speaking of performance, besides responsiveness, which was like the big performance improvement that we've been looking for, Escort says they've also been improving the Ka sensitivity of their detectors as well. This is something that we haven't actually gone out to do our road testing with yet, but now that the weather's starting to get nicer and sunnier, I'm sure we're going to start seeing a lot more testing and data over the next couple months. Either way though, improvements to Ka-band sensitivity are always welcome. Now, anytime you're wanting to improve the performance of the detector, you're always going to have to balance that with the false alert filtering as well, and that's something that Escort has actually improved upon here with this newest update as well. For example, they're saying that they've now reduced false alerts on all bands. On Ka-band for the Redline 360C specifically, they said that they fixed some of the falsing issues for rear Ka-band alerts. And then on K-band across their lineup, they're saying that they've also improved the CAS filtering, or collision avoidance systems, or blind spot filtering. Same thing. Now, I've only had a little bit of seat time so far, just driving my kids to the doctor or dropping them off at daycare or something. But so far, I haven't had any blind spot falses out of the Redline yet. As for a better data point, though, Westwind77 has reported that he took a 3-hour road trip with his Redline, and in all that time, he didn't get a single blind spot false. Similarly, I saw a post from Florida Titan where he just put 100 miles on his updated Redline, and he didn't have any blind spot falses either. That's very impressive. Now, I'm going to need more seat time to confirm and kind of verify for myself, but based on what I've been seeing so far with the performance improvements and the improved false alert filtering, like fewer false alerts in the Unidens, Redensos, Valentines, etc., I'm thinking that this updated Redline 360C might actually become my new daily driver and actually replace the position of the Uniden R8. In fact, I'm also going to have to spend some time now kind of sitting down and just rethinking the rankings for how all of these detectors are going to line up. I've mentioned before in previous videos that when Escort addresses this, the responsiveness and all that kind of stuff, I think it's going to be a much better pick. And with the better blind spot filtering, apps and Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff, I think it's now going to be a much better option than it was maybe weeks or months ago. And then finally, the last quick thing to mention regarding false alert filtering, Escort has also mentioned that they've improved their speed-based sensitivity in auto modes. Now, admittedly, I'm not entirely sure exactly what that means. I've been talking to Escort trying to get a little bit more clarity on that, and when we find more information, I'll post it on the forums or on my website and whatnot. But either way, it's good to see that they're making some improvements here to the different sensitivity modes too. Next, moving on to photo radar detection. Against the GATSO, Escort saying they've improved their response time, reduced false alerts, and added country-specific GATSO RT4 functionality. And they mentioned that GATSO detection itself is actually embedded in the K-band detection option. This is in contrast to the other photo radar systems that have individual toggles for those specific radar guns. And speaking of some of those other photo radar guns, Escorts mentioned that they've reduced some of the false alerts against the MRCT, for example. This is good to see because MRCT specifically, the detectors actually had a lot of false alerts against those, almost excessive, to the point where, I've just turned it off altogether. I don't have any of these guns in my area, but I like to turn them on just to kind of test and get a sense of at least false alert filtering. So far, after an hour and a half of driving, I've only had one MRCT false, which is definitely way better than before. I've also seen some MRCD falses as well in some of the typical intersections, like I've seen before. And I've also noticed that unlike before, where the detectors would simply display an M on screen when they're detecting any type of multi-radar, now the display will identify MRCD and say MD on screen. And for MRCT, it will now say MT on screen. Additionally, when it comes to cloud alerts for Escort Live and whatnot, photo radar, you're now going to be able to get live alerts specifically for the mass diffusion, the GATSO, or the multi-radar as well, just like you can get for like XK, KA, and laser. Additionally, the iOS apps now have a toggle specifically for mass diffusion. They didn't before. Previously it was only in the detector, but now it's available in the app. The Android versions of the apps, those are going to be adding the toggles in a future firmware update, or future app update rather, that should be available soon. And then finally, MESTA detection for the mass diffusion. The Max 3 didn't offer that before, but now this latest firmware update adds that capability into the detector, so that's cool to see. And then finally, when it comes to bug fixes, two quick things to talk about. And they both actually have to do with laser functionality. First up, Escort says that they fixed an issue with the jam to kill feature, where if you set the detectors to shift 4 to where they would automatically disarm after 4 seconds, well, if you were to manually disable the shifters faster than the 4-second mark, it could actually re-enable the jammers momentarily, which is not actually what you would want when you're trying to disable them. So this bug fix should actually ensure that manually disarming your jammers shouldn't work properly here. And then finally, for the Max 3 specifically, Escort says that they've fixed a compatibility issue with the ZR5 and ZW5 laser jammers. And so, as you can see, quite a bit of stuff here in this update. We've got improvements to responsiveness, which has been a long time coming. We've got some improvements to Ka detection range, long distance sensitivity. We've got some pretty good improvements here to blind spot filtering. It seems like they're now going to be some of the quietest detectors that are available on the market. We've got photo radar detection improvements. We've got some bug fixes. Like, there's a lot of stuff here. So I'm happy to see this update. Thank you, Escort. I know we've been asking for a lot of this stuff for a while, and thanks for taking the time to work on this and bring us these improvements here. And so, with that said, for more information or discussion or any of that kind of stuff, you'll find all the links that you need down below in the description. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys are doing great, and I'll see you in the next video.